cisgender, fat shaming, heteronormativity, intersectionality, patriarchy, rape culture. These are all terms that you have probably become familiar with, if not from listening to this show, just because they're out there now in the discourse. They sound like they should mean something because you hear them a lot. But where do they come from? In fact, I told you all, what was it now, maybe a couple of years ago, that I had just heard this term cisgender for the first time, which struck me as odd because starting at a very young age, I had a pretty expansive vocabulary. I'd never heard of this thing before. Where did it come from? Intersectionality, where did it come from? Well, there is a fantastic article in the Wall Street Journal by Peter Boghossian about something called idea laundering. And this really matters, by the way. Even if you don't care about what crazy academics are saying on campuses, you often have heard me say that campuses are the laboratories for left-wing craziness. That's where they're doing the most experimentation in a place where there are really no constraints on the stupidity, on the absurdity of their ideas, and they come out of these laboratories with these ideas. The campuses propagate these different words and concepts into the broader society with the stamp of approval of, well, it comes from university professors who have peer-reviewed journals. And Boghossian walks us through what he calls idea laundering. This is really interesting because this is how it all happens. The reason why your kids, for those of you who have kids about this age, will be coming home from school, certainly from high school, being told about gender identity versus sex. What's the difference? The reason your kids will come home and be told that intersectionality is the truth of all American society, that there are different groups that are constantly in a battle for who is oppressing who. Heteronormativity, a fancy way of saying most people are heterosexual. That's all. That's what. And then they extrapolate all these things from that concept. That's heteronormativity is that the dominant culture, the dominant perception that people have of sexuality is that men are attracted to women and women are attracted to men. It's not the case. That's the only way things are in this or any other society, but that has been the dominant paradigm. How do you get these ideas? Oh, fat shaming is the one that actually Boghossian singles in on here. What do you do if you are a particularly activist-minded academic? How do you create concepts that then will get fed into the broader society and have real influence? I mean, you look at, for example, the Obama administration. The Obama administration's policy on bathroom usage for people that have gender identity issues was you better allow the 12-year-old boy to use the 12-year-old girl's locker room, or else we will consider pulling Department of Education funding under discrimination accusations that you're being discriminatory. So this goes all the way up to rape culture. This was another one I kept hearing about all the time. Rape culture on college campuses. CNN even had a documentary. I didn't watch it because it's CNN and CNN's crap. But CNN had a documentary, I think, called The Hunting Ground about college campuses. There were these journos who were so very gullible, not just in the Duke lacrosse case, where there was no rape and there was a deranged accuser who tried to ruin a bunch of people's lives, and a power-mad Democrat prosecutor, Nifong, tried to ruin some young boys' lives. The media went along with that because, there's this culture of rape on campus. Rape is a felony. You sit down to have lunch with somebody and you tell them that you got caught up in a stock scam 10 years ago, you served a little time. They might say, yeah, we all make mistakes. You served your debt to society. You sit down and say that you were convicted of rape. The person's going to rightly want to end the lunch and say, what the heck is this? This is a rape culture? Just the notion that that's a phrase that should be in common usage is absurd on college campuses. But that's what they say. Where does all of this come from? And it comes from campuses. It comes from the takeover of academia by left-wing activists with degrees in social studies without really much to add to the discourse and who don't really view their role as making sure that people who go to school know things and gain certain skills. They view their role as making sure they only know certain things that they tell them they have to know for the purposes of being the shock troops of the left when they are going through adulthood and then raising their own children. They are indoctrination factories. You see this all the time. How often do you have a left-wing speaker show up at a college campus and people challenge me on this, by the way, when we talked about the Ann Coulter speech at Berkeley. I said, I brought this up in the show, and some blue-check journo idiot was saying to me, "Well, this happens, look at a Trump rally." I said, well, I'm not talking about political rallies. I'm talking about invited speakers to a college campus. Name me one time that a left-wing speaker has shown up at a college campus, and there have been 1,000, 2,000 angry, screaming, profane, shrill, shrieking conservatives saying you're not allowed to speak here. How many? I could sit here and run through off the top of my head dozens of speeches where that has happened with leftists. I mean, I don't know if the number was 1,000 or 100 protests, but, where they tried to shut it down. Shut it down. Don't allow people to be heard. The ideas are too dangerous, you see, including ideas that in many cases have been considered consensus or status quo within the academy stretching back for decades. How do they do this? How do they change the conversation so abruptly so that now we have to use terminology that they set for us? Let me bring you back to this Boghossian piece. An idea laundering. It's a fabulous piece, really important. Because this is why your kids are coming home saying cisgender and gender identity and all this stuff. You're like, what? It all starts on the campus. Here's what they do. You got a bunch of people that feel a certain way in academia. We feel like fat shaming, for example, is wrong. Now, being mean to anyone is wrong. Being mean to anyone because of their weight. I think a vast majority of us all have different times, or we're struggling with weight, or we're trying to get a little healthier, or trying to drop some pounds. There's a lot that goes into weight, including genetics, including people's socioeconomic circumstances. It's just not as simple as, just show willpower. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, and people should be considerate about that. And it's a struggle that I think a lot of us all share. But that's different than creating an academic discipline around fat shaming, which is what colleges have done. How'd they do it? Well, they start a journal, an academic journal. In this case, it was called Fat Studies. They created an academic periodical called Fat Studies, and they had then other academics write about how talking about fat as a bad thing, or being overweight or obesity is a bad thing, was psychologically harmful and distressing and all. And then they have other academics who peer review this, but the peer review process is supposed to be, and this goes back to the roots of the academy. It's supposed to be a process of distilling truth through opposition to what is being written there, or looking for flaws, looking for counter-arguments, looking for ways that the peer review is supposed to be, is this thing unassailable? Is it true? Try to show us that it's not true. That's not how peer review works in social studies departments, or whatever, social sciences rather, which are not science. As a political science major, I can tell you there was no science to it at all. The few times we looked at regression analysis and statistics and things, everybody's eyes rolled back in their head and they said, let's argue more about, abortion rights. Nobody cared about any of that other stuff. There's really no science to it. But if you look at the social sciences across the academy, what you find out is that as long as you're taking a left-wing point of view, the peer review process for these journals that they just make up is meant to just consolidate the opinion around whatever is being promulgated. So they all go, yeah, that's great. Fat shaming is a terrible thing. And then when people say, well, what about the health risks and that's the biggest public health epidemic we really face actually now has to do directly with diseases of excess calories and type 2 diabetes, among other things. And they just shout all that down with, excuse me, we have a fat studies journal that explains all of this. It is peer reviewed. It is the science now. But it's not the science. It's just the consolidation of like-minded opinion in something they are calling a journal that they are saying is peer-reviewed that is really just their forwarding of a narrative based on emotion and feeling, a narrative that is not rooted in any reality. Here's an example in Fat Studies, the journal. Toward a Fat Pedagogy, a study of pedagogical approaches aimed at challenging obesity discourse in post-secondary education. Does anyone even know? I mean, I just read that to you. I read it. I've read it before. I read the piece before it came on air. I don't even really know what they think they're saying here. And that's part of this as well. They dress up flimsy thoughts with fancy words because then most people just sort of say, okay, it looks like it's academic. And therefore there's some imprimatur on the fact that this is coming out of a college or a university. There must be some truth to it. I always say that word a little bit funny because I feel like I say it wrong sometimes, but whatever. I learn words by reading them, not by hearing them. These articles tell us that obesity is a narrative such as being healthy and there's another narrative such as being healthy at every size, and there's no reason to privilege one narrative over another. The reason why he so focused in on fat studies here in this piece is because that's just not true. Being morbidly obese is very, very dangerous for your health. There is no alternative. There is no scientific alternative narrative about how being morbidly obese is okay for your health. This is not the same thing as don't be mean to people that are struggling with weight. I've struggled with weight. Lots of people in struggle with weight. Everybody struggles with weight, really, that you come across on a day-to-day basis. Just they don't necessarily talk about it. But to say that, you weigh 1,000 pounds, that's fine. That's the way that's the way God made you. This is not based in any science. This is just narrative. And then when you start to take this and look at, okay, what about cisgender and heteronormativity and all these other concepts that come out? They're giving fancy words to, well, we have a feeling that people shouldn't just think that being heterosexual is the normal thing. Well, normal is a word that imbues some value judgment on things, but it is certainly the majority, and there's no reason to believe that that's going to change anytime soon. Intersectionality, there are different groups that are all filled with oppression against each other, and that there's a actual hierarchy of oppression that the left looks at throughout American society. Are you black? Are you Latino? Are you white? Are you Asian? Are you trans? Are you, all these different things. And that every discussion of politics the first thing you do is put somebody on that board, if you will, on that chessboard, on that playing field. Before you can discuss the merits of an argument, the drawbacks of an argument, what's true, what's fair, what's good, what's decent. Now, forget all that. First, where does this person go in the intersectional hierarchy? This all comes from academia. This is a problem for the kids who have to study these places. This is from the Boghossian piece. Quote, students leave the academy believing they know things they do not know. They bring this knowledge to their places of employment where, over time, laundered ideas and the terminology that accompanies them become normative, giving them even more unearned legitimacy. This is why you've heard of some of the terms we began with: cisgender, fat-shaming, heteronormativity, intersectionality, patriarchy, rape culture, and whiteness. They've been laundered through the peer-reviewed literature by activist scholars, then widely taught for years before being brought into the world. This is not knowledge. These are just feelings dressed up by academia to make it seem like if you argue with this, you are breaking with the consensus of the super smart people who all they do is sit around thinking about this stuff. And yet it's full of jargon and absurdity. This is where you got that piece that was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and the title of the piece was, and I quote, "The Penis as Social Construct," end quote. It was published and peer-reviewed by an academic journal that claimed to be the authority on different gender studies, and they put this thing out there because they're so steeped in this kind of thinking, and they're so used to taking ideas that are just really about either political or cultural proclivities and prejudices, and make it seem like there's something behind this, or then, well, I feel this way. It would be like if I created an academic journal about how marzipan is a greatly underrated food that everybody should eat more and should be more readily available because it's delicious. And I just don't see it in enough places. And I got a bunch of other people that love marzipan to come together and say, hey, we reviewed this and he's right. You should have more marzipan, especially around the holidays. I'm starting a movement. I'm not building any science. This is Alinskyite community organizing in place of academic, intellectual rigor and pursuit of the truth. It has overtaken our college campuses and universities. It's why these kids come out spouting these things, and they get so defensive and so angry when you challenge it, because these ideas are not supposed to be challenged. It's peer reviewed. It's put out in the journal. Professor so and so and Professor so and so use this, and you get to sound smart because you use these big new fancy words. But what does it all mean? Nothing. I just want to know, this is a real news story because I mentioned marzipan and my activism in favor. I wanted to pick something kind of random, but I do really, marzipan and chocolate. You ever eat it? No, it's like way too, that's not a burger with no bun and American cheese on it.
I don't even know what marzipan is.
Are you serious?
I
It's
wish
like
I
a
wasn't.
sweetened almond paste. It's amazing. It's like in candy sometimes.
Anything with paste.
So,
I don't want to eat that.
So you usually think you can give your takes on food, and you're allowed, because food is literally about taste, right? We use the word taste for things we like. Food, though, is like, how does this taste to me? And it is inherently subjective, and people have different taste buds. And don't use too much hot sauce, folks. Over time, it starts to you're the burning and everything that can actually dull. I'm just telling you. Hashtag science. I like hot sauce too, but don't go too crazy with it. Tom Nichols. Tom and I know each other a little bit. I've had him on the show in the past. Tom is now a Democrat. He used to be a conservative. Trump broke him. I don't know what to say. He tweeted out, I think people often pretend to like non-American cuisines as a way of showing sophistication. I'm honest enough to say my mostly Irish taste buds cannot handle whatever's called Indian food in the U.S. and the U.K. You may continue with your outrage. And you know what's amazing? There was outrage. People were saying this was racist. People were saying you should get fired. You are not allowed to not like Indian food. I guarantee you, if you trashed American food as a white male, people would say, oh, yes, of course, America. People like, you know what's considered sophisticated among liberals? To say America has no culture. Yeah, we're just the most wealthy, powerful, sophisticated, culturally dominant country in the history of the planet, and we have no culture. That's a smart take. People say this stuff all the time, but this is a BBC News story, all right? Say you don't like Indian food, and you get trashed globally for being a racist. This is the world we live in now. I also wanted to just point something out here. I like to dive into the left-wing desire to control speech and to make us use certain words, and I do think we're heading into a place where the idea laundering that the grievance scholars engages in has already become the way that you are judged by in social media interactions. You can now be banned. We talked about Andy Ngo getting suspended because of hateful posts. It's not hateful. It's just stating facts. But stating facts can be hateful to leftists. But also, if you have to remember that even if you give them what they want in some cases, what the left wants now in discourse is often absurd and self-contradictory. It is destined to only result in more demands about what you can say and how you can say it. So don't think that you buy them off by just by conceding on this or conceding on that issue. You concede to what you think is right, what you think is moral. For example, I've always said, if somebody wants to change their name, everyone has a right to change their name. So if a guy named Bob now wants to be called, Claudette, I will call Bob Claudette the same way that my middle name is Buckman and people call me Buck, and everyone goes, why do you have such a weird name? I don't know. Ask my parents. They wanted to make life harder than it had to be. Love you, Mom and Dad. But people are allowed to choose. You're allowed to choose your name. You're allowed to choose your name. That's different, though, than saying you have to be a party to falsehood or a fraud, to say that you have to be willing to agree to say things that you know to be untrue. And here's something that I thought was very, very interesting today, looking at the argument around announcing your pronouns. This is the thing you're supposed to do now. You know, my pronouns are he, his, and him. And people do this, and you know you're at it's really become something like the secret handshake at a left-wing rally group, anything. You stand up and you say, and this reminds me of during the Occupy Wall Street days, remember that protest movement? People would do this thing where they would twinkle their fingers in the air as a way of showing applause. They would snap instead of clap, and they would do this thing called mic check. They go, mic check, mic check. And, you know, one person says something and everyone repeats it as a way of amplifying the message. These were cultural signifiers of being in the in group with the left, of being in the cool kid group, if you will. For most people, because a very, very small percentage of the country has a problem with its gender, doesn't understand its gender, it's less than 1% of this country. For most people, saying what your pronouns are would seem to just be an enormous waste of time. But here's the issue with that. The reason that you are supposed to say what your preferred pronouns are now, and this is according to leftist doctrine, this is now, if you're going to be, you know, you had this at, you know, CNN when they had their town hall, and Bro Cuomo made his joke, like, yeah, here are my pronouns, ha ha. And everybody's like, not funny. Not funny. But the reason you say it is that it is meant to show that there's nothing out of the ordinary, and therefore there should be no disapproval heaped on people who do not seem visually to align with whatever their preferred pronouns are. So the point here is to make it that if everybody announces their pronouns, then when people feel compelled to announce their pronouns, they won't be automatically singled out for being strange for announcing their pronouns. So it's like we all do it, and therefore, nobody should feel left out. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, I think it was in Saved by the Bell, where Lisa Turtle sprained. Remember this? Lisa Turtle sprained her ankle, and she had to go to prom. And they did a dance called the Sprain, where everybody was pretending that because she didn't want to feel left out. So everyone's doing the Sprain. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I remember that episode.
Yeah. I think she went with Screech, right?
Yes, begrudgingly.
Yeah, who had quite a career afterwards.
A career in jail.
Of stuff. Yeah. Dustin Diamond. I watched that show so many times, I even remember their names. Yeah. I believe her name was Lark Voorhees.
Yes.
And there was Mark Paul Gosselaar. And, of course, Mario Lopez.
Yes, and Tiffany Amber.
Who I believe is a little right of center, by the way. I've been
Isn't
told.
he the host of Extra or something like that? One of those shows.
Anyway, so everyone danced like they had a sprained ankle because then no one felt like they were left out with the sprain. That was the whole idea. If everyone announces their pronouns, then no one's left out when they have to announce their pronouns. Or it feels weird. Here's the problem. This is why I'm starting with this. Is why I'm trying to tell you the left is absurd. It doesn't make any sense. When people announce their pronouns, and everyone is announcing their pronouns, and the pronouns align with what you would expect them to be in a vast majority of cases, then when someone is expected to announce their pronouns and they have a different gender identity, they will clearly be different than the people that are announcing their pronouns. So just by announcing it, it doesn't change the basic fact that you have somebody who perhaps appears to be male who says my pronouns are, she, her, and hers. So you haven't dealt with the issue at all. And then what it just turns into is, well, now everyone is announcing their pronouns, is therefore playing into perhaps the stereotypes around who does and does not conform to their gender identity. So we're just back where we started. It doesn't do anything. It makes no sense to announce your pronouns. It's supposed to be some kind of concession to a group that feels aggrieved and put upon. But if we all actually did what they tell us to do, the next demand would be, well, now we can't announce our pronouns because when we do, it's just showing the people that announce them that they're different. It's like they're having to proclaim it to everybody, their differentness. It changes nothing. This is stupid. It is absurd. But it's really not about being kind. It's not about being decent. If it were, I'd be in favor of those things. It's about getting you to bend the knee. You bend the knee on announcing your pronouns, and then you bend the knee on nobody announces your pronouns. You bend the knee on saying that somebody is a she when it's a he, and then you bend the knee when you say that we're not allowed to use any gender-specific pronouns for anyone anymore. And then this, of course, also influences how we can talk about policy. Are you allowed to object to a transgender female, biologically male, being the counselor for a day camp for a bunch of young girls? Is that something? Are you allowed to look at gender identity that way and start? This is, and they just expect you to bend the knee or they will destroy you. And this is why we spend time on these issues here on the show, because the way you're allowed to talk about things and the way that society insists that you only use certain words, whether it's undocumented or cisgender or any of these things, this is all for a purpose. And the purpose is not being polite. The purpose is getting you to bend. The purpose is getting you to say, okay, fine, I submit. I'll do what you tell me to do. Because once they get you to start the habit of submitting to their absurd and constantly changing demands, then they can just continue on with that momentum and get you to just start conceding to other things too, and they know that. Once you say, fine, leave me alone, then you'll say, fine, leave me alone, I'll do it on this other thing too. I won't go to Chick-fil-A anymore because, the Chick-fil-A is so bigoted. I won't do this. I won't. Please, just let me live my life in peace. I'll do whatever you want. This is what they want. That sentiment, that feeling of I'll do anything in order to prevent the continued intellectual, psychological harassment, that's what they want. Don't give it to them. Think this stuff through on your own. That's why we've got the Freedom Hut, friends. Big headline right now on FoxNews.com. Collision course. Long-awaited report on FISA abuse from the Inspector General could scramble Dems' impeachment plans. Some of us have been saying, by some of us I mean certainly me, all along, that perhaps the imperative for impeachment at all costs isn't only driven by the desire to thwart the 2020 election. That's the primary one, but also perhaps to get ahead. I believe I said this on Bret Baier's show a couple of weeks ago, to get ahead of the report that's going to make things look pretty bad for the Democrats. Here's where we are right now on the whole FISA abuse. People call it Spygate. I think that's a little too broad. It's like almost calling it like Badgate or something. Like Spygate it's not, that doesn't really work for me as a term, but look, there's no good term for it. I understand. But the effort to use the intelligence apparatus of the United States government against a presidential campaign, that has somehow been treated as normal, that has found its way into our discussions about what's going on with the presidency. People say, yeah, well, of course they surveilled Carter Page. And of course they did. No, it's not an of course situation. This low-level lawyer, that was the report we had last week from within the Department of Justice, who was removed and may be criminally prosecuted for changing something that went into a FISA report. They're going to try to say that this was just a lone actor. Once again, somebody else doing something that only makes sense if they have a feverish hatred of Donald Trump and are willing to do anything, including getting fired and losing their job and losing perhaps their freedom to stop Trump. But we're told that this is a one-off. This is a one-off. This isn't somebody, this lawyer that they're saying change the FISA. There's nothing to be worried about here, nothing to be concerned about here. I disagree. The problem that we're going to face here is that first of all, they've brought over to CNN. So anything you see from CNN is kind of hilarious. They've got McCabe over there. They've got the former General Counsel Baker, I believe, of the FBI. This guy is over there on CNN all the time. And they were the ones in power. I mean, CNN has people analyzing essentially their own actions as though they're fair-minded experts on these issues. They're putting them in front of you because CNN was in on this whole thing too. Tapper found out about the dossier being briefed to Trump within 2 days, and then he got all mad at Ben Smith from BuzzFeed because Ben Smith actually showed people what the dossier was, and Tapper wanted to squeeze as much as he could out of that whole dossier story as long as he could because he's a hack and a fraud. But yeah, that was the way this thing was all going. And yet now we look at it and say to ourselves, maybe, just maybe, what we will see when this FISA report comes out is that there was an effort to pretend that people were very dumb and had very bad judgment at senior levels of the United States government, when really what they were doing was playing dumb so they could make mistakes that would happen to be negative for Trump, that would allow, for example, different communications that Carter Page had with anybody in the Trump campaign to be looked at, to be part of the collection process under that FISA warrant. And, Papadopoulos and these different investigations that were going at this time, this is not possible. None of this is possible in a good faith law enforcement effort where people would say, well, hold on a second. Carter Page, who had worked alongside the FBI against Russian spies, was known to the FBI, had already met with the FBI, and who the FBI knew Russian spies said was kind of an idiot. He's the nexus for this whole Russia-Trump conspiracy. And remember this, my friends, even if they tell you that they had a legitimate justification for looking at Russian interference in the election, which I believe they did, that is a big leap from, okay, we also have to make sure that we can investigate the presidential campaign and then the presidency itself of Donald Trump because of this theory that Trump and his campaign were working with the Russians. Where does that come from? Who originated that idea? This is what we really have to know. I mean, I think people would say right now, you might be guessing, Brennan and Clapper, and there are a few people that come to mind. But what were the real origins of all of this? We may get closer to that with this report that comes out on FISA. We'll also find out, those of us who were saying the dossier was necessary. Without the dossier, it probably wouldn't have been able to get to the level of the FISA request they had on Carter Page. We'll see how accurate that was. We also, though, have the problem of the bureaucracy covering for itself, which I think is you're going to see that. That's going to happen here. I wish it weren't the case. It will be the case. The bureaucracy will be covering for itself at some level. They will say that bad judgment is not criminal, and bad judgment in matters of using the fearsome powers of the federal government against a presidential campaign, that just comes down to bad judgment. That's all. Bad judgment isn't about politics. It's not about criminality. You can't think that there really is a deep state just because these guys kept on bending the rules and making poor decisions that all happen to go toward getting dirt on Trump. That's right. They love to talk about Trump getting dirt on Hunter Biden. Our own FBI under the Obama administration was trying to get dirt on President Trump and use FISA to do it. If they can, let me just say this. If they can get a FISA warrant on Carter Page, they can get a FISA warrant on anybody. You can always come up with some pretext. You got any friends in a foreign country? Yeah, those friends probably have foreign friends who are bad. Let's just run a FISA on you. It's a joke. It's absurd. They talk to people like me. Oh, well, he has friends in foreign countries, and he knows people in the intelligence services, and we better monitor him. So I don't have high hopes, which now reminds me of the Buttigieg, like the Buttigieg song. And do you ever seen this? the high hopes dance that everyone's doing now for Buttigieg? This is like his followers.
Yes, it was mocked on SNL this weekend.
Oh, it was? Yeah.
They said he was trying to get a negative percentage of the black vote.
Wow.
Oh.
I did not see that. But I do not have high hopes for the Inspector General report being a massive blow to the deep state. I do think, though, that they're going to want us to swallow. It'll be like the other Inspector General report where they said that there was no bias in the Hillary Clinton email investigation, which was not true. There was bias. They showed us all this bias, and they said there wasn't bias. They're going to show us all kinds of abuse of FISA, but then in order to protect the institution of the Department of Justice and the FBI, they're going to say it wasn't political, though. So there really isn't any abuse that went on here. Oh, no. There was abuse.